The Queen of Revenge warning. This isn't just a story of betrayal. It's a story about how a woman's broken heart led her to become the Queen of Revenge. She was set to be a magnate's bride, but he abandoned her for a business deal, never knowing she was carrying his child. Now, she will re-enter his life on the arm of his most powerful enemy. Are you ready for a drama that will leave you breathless? Don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave a comment with your opinion. The scent of betrayal is one that is never forgotten. For Eleanor Vance, it smelled of expensive cologne and the cheap perfume of a woman who was supposed to be her friend. She was standing in the nursery, a space she had designed with dreams of a future, holding a positive pregnancy test, ready to share the happiest news of her life. But the man she loved, her fiancé, Arthur Bennett, walked in not with a ring, but with a confession that would shatter her world. He was leaving her for another woman, for a business merger, and he didn't know that by walking out the door, he wasn't just abandoning a woman, but his own unborn son. This is the story of how her deepest pain became the catalyst for her greatest triumph as she rose from the ashes of his betrayal to become the bride of his most powerful and ruthless enemy. The Chicago city skyline was a tapestry of bright promises from the windows of the penthouse Eleanor shared with her fiancé, Arthur Bennett. Her life, like the view, felt limitless, a perfect picture of modern success and romance. Eleanor, a talented and promising architect, had poured her soul into the design of their shared space, a testament to their future. But her proudest creation was the small room at the end of the hall, the one painted in soft shades of sage and cream, the baby's room. For weeks, a quiet and hopeful secret had been blooming inside her. That morning, 2 pink lines on a plastic stick had confirmed it. The joy, pure and effervescent, bubbled up inside her, so potent it felt like it could lift her off the ground. She clutched the test in her hand, her other hand resting instinctively on her still flat belly. A baby. Their baby. She imagined the look on Arthur's face when she told him. His charming, easy smile would turn into one of genuine disbelief, then melt into the tender adoration she had fallen in love with. He was the golden heir of Bennett and Associates, a real estate giant that had shaped half the city's skyline. He was ambitious and driven, and she loved that about him. But she also loved the Arthur who would kick off his $1,000 shoes, curl up on the sofa with her, and whisper dreams that had nothing to do with stock prices or board meetings. The sound of a key in the lock sent a jolt of anticipation through her. "Arthur!" she called, her voice bright with contained excitement. He walked in, looking like the prince of the city in his custom Tom Ford suit, but his smile didn't reach his eyes. There was a tension in his shoulders she hadn't seen before, a strange, cautious look that made the joy in her chest flicker with uncertainty. "Eleanor," he said, his voice flat. He didn't come over to kiss her as he usually did. He loosened his tie and went to the bar, pouring himself a whiskey. Alone. He never drank whiskey alone before dinner. "Is everything okay?" she asked, her plan to happily announce her pregnancy suddenly feeling fragile. He took a long drink of the amber liquid, his back to her. "We need to talk." Those 3 words were the harbingers of doom in any relationship. Eleanor's heart began to beat a nervous, heavy rhythm against her ribs. She slid the pregnancy test into her jeans pocket. "Okay, talk." He finally turned to face her, his handsome features contorted into a mask of tense resolve. Us. It's not working anymore." The words hung in the air, so absurd, so completely out of place in her perfect life, that she almost laughed. "What are you talking about, Arthur? We're getting married in 6 months. Last week we were looking at wedding venues." "I thought so too," he said, and the lie in his voice was like a physical slap. But things have changed. My priorities have changed. A cold, sharp dread began to slide down her spine. What priorities? He wouldn't look her in the eyes. He was looking out at the city, at the buildings that bore his family's name. The company, Eleanor. The legacy. There's been an opportunity. A merger. She frowned, confused. A merger? What does a business deal have to do with us? He took a deep breath, the kind a man takes before executing a particularly unpleasant task. The merger isn't just between companies, it's between families. The Vidals. Sophia Vidal. The name hit her like a physical impact. A socialite with a smile as sharp as a razor and a family legacy that rivaled the Bennets. Eleanor had always felt a chill around Sophia, a predatory glint in her eyes every time she looked at Arthur at galas and charity events. Eleanor had dismissed it as harmless flirting, secure in Arthur's love. She had been a fool. "Sophia," she whispered, the name tasting like poison. He finally looked at her, and the pity in his eyes was worse than any anger. "It's a strategic alliance, Eleanor. It secures the future of Bennett and Associates for the next 50 years. It's what my mother and my family need." "And what about what we need?" Her voice cracked. "What about our future? The life we were building? The baby's room at the end of the hall?" He flinched at the mention of the baby's room. That was a dream. This is reality. I can't build a future on a dream when I have a duty to my family's empire. The carefully constructed fairy tale of her life was crumbling around her, turning to dust and ash. The man she loved was standing in front of her, talking about their life together, as if it were a failed company that needed to be liquidated. "So you choose her? You choose a business deal over me?" The question was redundant. The answer was written all over his face. "I'm making the difficult decision. The one that secures my family's legacy," he said, his voice gaining a more resolute tone. The voice of Arthur Bennett, CEO in training. Sophia understands the world we live in. She's a part of it. The implication was clear. Eleanor wasn't. She was the architect, the artist, the middle-class girl who had dared to dream she could be a queen in his kingdom of steel and glass. Tears streamed down her face, hot and filled with rage. "And what about love, Arthur? Does that factor into your strategic alliances?" "Love is a luxury, Eleanor," he said, the words so cold they burned her. "Duty is a necessity." He pulled his hand from his pocket and threw the pregnancy test at her. It hit her expensive shoe and clattered to the marble floor. He looked down, confused, then stooped to pick it up. He stared at the two pink lines, the color draining from his face. For a single, heart-stopping moment, Eleanor saw a flash of the man she loved. A flash of shock, of awe, of something that might have been regret. "Eleanor, this is—" "Yes," she sobbed, a raw, ragged sound escaping her throat. "Congratulations, Arthur. Your legacy is already secured." She expected him to rush to her, to hold her, to say this changed everything. Instead, he looked from the test to her, and a new kind of expression crossed his face. It wasn't regret or love. It was fear. Cold, calculating fear. He looked at her stomach as if it were not a miracle, but a complication, a problem to be managed. We can handle this," he said, his voice low and urgent. "The company doctor is very discreet. We can arrange a procedure. No one has to know." As the cold dread that had been sliding down her spine now wrapped around her completely, freezing her heart. He wasn't just leaving her. He wasn't just betraying her. He was trying to erase her, to erase their child, as if they were an administrative error in his grand life plan. In that moment, the love she had felt for him died. It wasn't a slow, agonizing death. It was a violent, instantaneous execution. In its place, another kind of fire began to burn, a cold rage, hard and brilliant as a diamond. She raised her chin, her tear-stained face now a mask of icy composure. "Get out," she repeated, her voice low and dangerous, a tone he had never heard before. "Get out of my apartment. Get out of my life. And never, ever touch me, or speak to me, or my child again." He saw the finality in her eyes. The door to her heart, once flung open for him, was now padlocked, barred, and sealed in ice. He let out a short, frustrated sigh, as if she were a stubborn employee, not the woman whose heart he had just pulverized. "The Bennett family lawyers will be in touch," he said, his voice once again the cold, distant voice of a businessman, "to discuss a settlement for your silence." He left the pregnancy test on the marble counter as if it were a piece of garbage and walked out the door without looking back. Eleanor was left alone in the penthouse, the shimmering skyline now mocking her with its empty promises. She looked at the door to the baby's room, the room of dreams, now a monument to her naivete. The tears had stopped. The shock was hardening into something else, something solid and unbreakable inside her. He thought he could erase her. He thought he could buy her silence and discard her and her baby like a corporate write-off. He didn't know Eleanor Vance. He had just created an enemy, and in a city of predators and power players, he had made the fatal mistake of underestimating the fury of a woman who had nothing left to lose. If you were Eleanor, how would you handle the public humiliation and the loneliness? Would you seek revenge, or would you simply focus on the well-being of your baby? Leave a comment and tell us what you think. The price of revenge. The following weeks were a blur of gray misery. The Bennett family lawyers were as swift and brutal as Arthur had promised. A man in a suit with a face like a clenched fist handed her a thick envelope. It contained a non-disclosure agreement that read like a gag order and a check with enough zeros to feel insulting. It was hush money, severance for a terminated relationship. Eleanor tore the check in half and returned it with a one-word note. No. The retaliation was immediate. Her access to the penthouse was revoked. Her belongings were unceremoniously unpacked into boxes and tossed into storage. A detailed list was emailed to her, as if she were a tenant who had defaulted on her lease. The locks were changed. Her name was scrubbed from the guest list. Security guards who had once greeted her with a warm, "Good morning, Ms. Vance," now looked at her as if she were a ghost. Arthur's engagement to Sophia Vidal was announced in a luxury magazine, a lavish 10-page spread celebrating the merger of the century. There they were, smiling, radiant, clinking champagne glasses. Arthur's hand rested possessively on Sophia's waist, in the exact spot where Eleanor's baby was growing, silent and defiant. The world celebrated their union, oblivious to the wreckage they had left behind. Eleanor found refuge in a small rented room in a Pilsen apartment, the kind of place she thought she had left behind forever. The grandeur of the penthouse was replaced by peeling paint and the constant wail of sirens. She was broke, pregnant, and completely alone. Her best friend, Hannah, a feisty journalist who had never trusted Arthur, was her only lifeline, bringing groceries and righteous indignation in equal measure. "You have to fight him, Eleanor," Hannah insisted, pacing the tiny room. "Take him to court. Expose him for the soulless corporate monster he is." "And what would that accomplish?" Eleanor asked, her voice exhausted. She stared out the window at the brick wall of the adjacent building. "The Bennetts own half the judges in this city. Their PR team would paint me as a gold-digging opportunist. They'd drag my name through the mud until there was nothing left. It would be a scandal for a week and then forgotten, and I would have put my baby through all of that for nothing." Protecting her child was now her only goal. The rage was still there, a pilot light constantly burning in her chest, but it was contained by a fierce maternal instinct. She began looking for work, but her portfolio was tied to a firm that did significant business with Bennett and Associates. The doors that had once been wide open were now politely but firmly closed. The Bennett's influence was long and suffocating. One rainy Tuesday afternoon, as she walked away from an unfruitful job interview, her spirits at their lowest, she saw a sleek black car idling by the curb. It was a Maybach, a silent behemoth of wealth and power that was completely out of place on the gritty Chicago street. The rain sheeted down, turning the city into a watercolor of blurred lights and deep shadows. As she passed, the back window slid down. Inside sat a man she recognized instantly from financial pages and society columns. Julian Cole. If Arthur Bennett was the city's golden prince, Julian Cole was its dark king. His company, Cole Industries, was the only real rival to the Bennett's empire. They were locked in a decades-long, ruthless battle for real estate, tech, and financial dominance. Where the Bennetts were old money, cultivating an image of dynastic prestige, Cole was a self-made force of nature, a shark who had devoured his competition with terrifying efficiency. He was notoriously private, rarely photographed, and rumored to be absolutely ruthless. His sharp, triangular face, with deep-set dark eyes, was even more intimidating in person. "Ms. Vance," he said, his voice a low, calm, inflectionless baritone that commanded attention. Eleanor froze, her cheap umbrella doing little to protect her from the wind-whipped rain. Why was Julian Cole, Arthur Bennett's mortal enemy, talking to her? A man in a driver's uniform quickly got out of the car and opened the back door for her. "Mr. Cole would like to speak with you. Please, get out of the rain." Every instinct screamed at her to run. This man was a predator, and she was a wounded prey. But where could she run to? Back to her tiny room and her dwindling bank account. A strange feeling of having nothing left to lose pushed her forward. She folded her umbrella and slid into the car's luxurious leather interior. The door closed, blocking out the city noise and enclosing them in a silent cocoon of luxury. The car smelled of rich leather and something clean and masculine, like bergamot. Julian Cole stared at her with an unsettling stillness. His eyes missed nothing, taking in her rain-soaked coat, her worn portfolio case, and the defiant set of her jaw. "I won't waste your time, Ms. Vance," his voice began, as smooth as polished stone. "I am aware of your situation regarding Arthur Bennett." Eleanor's spine went rigid. "My situation is my private business. In this city, when a situation involves the heir to Bennett and Associates, it is rarely private for long. I make it my business to know my competitors' weaknesses, and Mr. Bennett has just demonstrated a significant one." He wasn't talking about business. He was talking about her. "I am not a weakness," she said, her voice sharp. "No," he conceded, his gaze intense. "You are a victim, which makes you a potentially very powerful asset." Her mind raced, trying to figure out his angle. Did he want her to go to the press, to give him insider information? "If you're looking for corporate secrets, you've come to the wrong person. I was his fiancée, not his business partner. I'm not interested in his business secrets. I'm interested in his public humiliation," Julian stated bluntly. Arthur Bennett and his mother Beatrice pride themselves on their immaculate public image, their family values, their legacy. A pregnant, jilted fiancée does not fit their narrative. "So you want me to go to the press?" she said, the taste of bitterness in her mouth. "You want to use me as a weapon against him?" "Not in the way you think," he corrected her. "A press scandal is messy and fleeting. I have a more permanent solution in mind. A move so audacious, it will permanently tarnish the Bennett name and position me for a final... Tunte. decisive victory against them. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle in the silent car. Eleanor waited, her heart beating a slow, heavy rhythm. "I propose a merger of our own," Julian said, his dark eyes fixed on hers. "I propose marriage." Eleanor stared at him, convinced she had misheard. "What are you saying? A marriage between you and me? We will be married within the week. You will become Eleanor Cole. Your son, when he is born, will be a Cole heir, raised with my name and all the power and privilege that comes with it. He will want for nothing. You will be safe, protected, and elevated to a position of power that Sofia Vidal can only dream of." The sheer audacity of the proposal took her breath away. It was insane. It was a plot from a soap opera. "Why? Why in God's name would you do that?" she asked, leaning slightly forward, her voice dropping to a confidential whisper. The only thing more shocking than Arthur Bennett's callous dismissal of his pregnant fiancée is that that same woman would reappear on the arm of his greatest enemy, that his child would be raised with my name. It's a checkmate, Ms. Vance. He explained how it would attack Arthur's pride, his legacy, and his public standing in one clean, devastating move. It would make him a laughingstock in the circles that mattered most to him. Eleanor saw the cold, hard logic of his plan. It was a masterfully cruel move, a piece of corporate warfare playing out on a human, personal chessboard. She was to be the queen in his game, used to trap the opposing king. "And what do you get out of this, besides humiliating Arthur?" she asked, her mind struggling to process the impossible offer. "I've already told you, a strategic victory. Beyond that, the terms are simple. It would be a marriage in name only, a contract. You would have your freedom, your own finances, your own life within the marriage. My only requirements are your public loyalty, and that you raise your son as a Cole. In return, I offer you sanctuary, and I offer you revenge." The word revenge hung between them, seductive and dangerous. He was offering her a gilded cage, but a cage that came with steel walls to protect her and her baby from the Bennetts. He was offering her the one thing she craved more than anything, a way to make Arthur pay. Not with money, but with the one thing he truly valued, his pride. She thought of Arthur's cold eyes when he suggested she handle her baby. She thought of his mother, Beatrice, who had no doubt orchestrated this entire affair, a woman who saw people as pawns. Julian Cole was playing the same game, but at least he was honest about it. He wasn't pretending this was love. He was offering a transaction, a shield for her, and a word for him. "You have until tomorrow morning to decide," he said, sensing her internal battle. He handed her a simple black business card. It had only a name and a number. "My car will be waiting for you outside your building at 9 a.m. If you get in, I'll have my answer." With that, the driver opened the door for her. Eleanor stepped back out into the rain, clutching the small, stiff card in her hand. The Maybach pulled away from the curb as silently as it had arrived, disappearing into the gray city. Eleanor stood on the sidewalk, rain soaking her hair, the world spinning around her. She had a choice: remain a victim, struggling for scraps in the shadows, or become a player in the city's great, ruthless game. She could be Eleanor Vance, the shattered architect, or she could become Eleanor Cole, the wife of the most powerful man she had ever met, and the living embodiment of Arthur Bennett's greatest regret. Her hand closed around the card, its sharp edges digging into her palm. For the first time in weeks, she felt not desperation, but a spark of something dangerous and thrilling, a spark of power. The king's checkmate. The next morning at 9 a.m. sharp, the black Maybach was waiting. Eleanor hadn't slept. She had spent the night pacing her tiny room, weighing the life of a victim against the life of a pawn. A pawn, she reasoned, at least stays on the board. Dressed in the best clothes she still owned, a simple but elegant black dress, she walked out of her building and didn't hesitate. She opened the car door herself and slid inside. Julian Cole was sitting in the same spot, looking as impeccable and unreadable as the day before. He simply nodded, a silent acknowledgement of her decision. "Mr. Harrison will handle the details," he said, gesturing to the silver-haired older man sitting across from them. Harrison had the quiet, efficient air of someone who had managed kings and navigated crises without raising his voice. He slid a leather-bound folder onto the polished table between the seats. "Mrs. Cole," he began, his voice a respectful murmur. The name sent a strange jolt through her. It was already happening. She opened the folder. Inside were not one, but two documents. The first was a prenuptial agreement, thicker than a novel. The second, much shorter, was a marriage license application. "The agreement is straightforward," Julian explained, his tone all business. "It outlines the terms of our arrangement. You will receive a substantial personal allowance, full control over a portfolio of properties, and a discretionary fund. All expenses related to the child will be covered by a separate, unlimited trust. Your son will be legally named my heir, with full inheritance rights to a designated portion of the Cole estate, irrevocable at birth." Eleanor scanned the pages. The numbers were astronomical. The clauses were steel. He was essentially making her and her unborn son immensely wealthy. "In return," he continued, "you will perform the public duties of my wife. Attend galas, host dinners, be seen on my arm. You will present a united front at all times. In private, we will lead separate lives. My penthouse has two main wings. You will occupy the east wing. I will stay in the west. Discretion is paramount. Loyalty is non-negotiable." "If I break the terms?" she asked, looking at him. "The financial arrangements are nullified. You walk away with nothing," he stated, without a hint of malice. It was a simple fact. But the child's trust is absolute. It cannot be touched, no matter what happens between us. That was the ultimate security. Even if she failed, her son would be safe. That was all that mattered. "And Arthur?" she asked, the name feeling foreign on her tongue. "You will have no contact with him. Any attempt he makes will be handled by my security teams. You are not to engage. Your indifference will be a far more potent weapon than any argument." She took the pen Mr. Harrison offered. Her hand was steady as she signed her name, Eleanor Vance, for the last time. She was giving up her old life, her old identity, for a future of gilded security and calculated revenge. The ceremony took place that afternoon at City Hall. It was a sterile, perfunctory affair. The only witnesses were Mr. Harrison and a hard-faced woman, who was Julian's head of security. There were no flowers, no music, no loving glances. When the justice of the peace said, "You may kiss the bride," Julian simply took her hand, his touch cool and firm, and brushed his lips against her knuckles. It was a gesture of possession, not affection. But outside the city hall, the real ceremony began. A swarm of paparazzi, alerted by an anonymous source, no doubt Mr. Harrison, descended on them like locusts. Flashes exploded. Reporters shouted questions. "Mr. Cole, is it true? Are you really married? What happened to your engagement to Arthur Bennett?" Julian was a master of the moment. He wrapped a protective arm around Eleanor, his body shielding her from the worst of the melee. He didn't smile, but he projected an air of unassailable confidence and possession. He guided her to the waiting Maybach, his hand resting possessively on the small of her back. He didn't say a word, letting the images speak for themselves. The message was clear. She is mine now. The news spread online within minutes. Billionaire Julian Cole marries jilted fiancé of rival Arthur Bennett. The story was a bombshell, exploding in the city's elite social circles. Eleanor's phone, which had been silent for weeks, lit up with messages from people she hadn't heard from in years. But it was one message that stopped her heart. It was from Hannah. "Is this real? Call me as soon as you're not with the Undertaker in a suit." A small smile touched Eleanor's lips. At least one thing in her life was still real. Her new home was Julian's penthouse, a sprawling duplex at the top of Cole Tower that made her old place with Arthur feel like a cottage. It was a palace of glass, chrome, and charcoal gray marble, exquisitely decorated, but with the warmth of a modern art museum. Her wing, the East Wing, was larger than any apartment she had ever lived in. It had its own living room, a studio, a massive bedroom, and a floor-to-ceiling white marble bathroom. Her closet was already filled with a new wardrobe, curated by a personal shopper in her exact size. It was overwhelming, impersonal, and deeply lonely. That first night, they ate dinner in a cavernous dining room, sitting at opposite ends of a long, polished mahogany table. The silence was broken only by the clinking of cutlery on porcelain. "Is the East Wing to your satisfaction?" Julian asked, his voice echoing slightly in the large room. "It's more than satisfactory," she replied. "Thank you. I've instructed my staff to get you anything you or the baby might need. My personal physician, Dr. Alistair Finch, is the best in the country. He will be in touch to schedule a preliminary consultation." It was all so efficient, so transactional. He was treating her pregnancy like a new acquisition that required the best possible maintenance. "Julian," she said, trying out his name. "Can I ask you something?" He raised an eyebrow, stopping his wine glass halfway to his lips. "You may. Why the Bennetts? I know you're business rivals, but this feels personal." His expression became guarded, a shadow falling over his dark eyes. "Everything in business is personal, Eleanor. The Bennetts believe in legacy and lineage, in the divine right of their name. They built their empire on the ruins of smaller, better men. I simply believe all empires eventually fall, and I intend to be the one holding the hammer when theirs does." There was a chilling finality in his tone, a hint of a much deeper, darker history, but he offered no more. The wall had gone back up. Later that night, Eleanor stood on the balcony of her wing, looking out at the city. In the distance, she could see the glowing sign of the Bennett Tower, Arthur's kingdom. She imagined the scene inside, the shock, the fury, the humiliation. Arthur's mother, Beatrice, a woman as cold and hard as the diamonds she wore, would be apoplectic. Arthur, for his part, would be seething. His pride, his most fragile and essential asset, had been dealt a mortal blow. He had cast her out, and she had landed in his enemy's castle, not as a refugee, but as his new queen. A notification popped up on the new encrypted phone Mr. Harrison had given her. It was a link to a society blog sent without comment. The headline read, "The Bride's Revenge, Cole's latest power play." The article was filled with photos of them leaving City Hall. One photo stood out, a close-up of Julian's hand on her back, his thumb resting gently near her waist. To the world, it looked protective, almost tender. But Eleanor knew the truth. It was a brand. She was a Cole now. She put a hand to her stomach, where the slightest bump was now noticeable. "Well, little one," she whispered to the city lights, "it looks like we're in the game now." She was no longer just a betrayed woman. She was the Cole bride, a symbol of defiance. It was a cold, lonely, and terrifying position, but it was infinitely better than being a victim. And for the first time in a long time, She felt a spark of control over her own destiny. Do you think a marriage for revenge can work, or is it doomed to fail? Can this type of relationship ever become something real? Comment your opinion. An unlikely love life. As Mrs. Cole was a carefully choreographed performance, Eleanor learned the steps quickly. There were charity board meetings where she sat across from women who had once pitied her, their expressions now a mixture of awe and thinly veiled envy. There were quiet, lavish dinners where Julian's business associates spoke to her with a deference that bordered on fear. She was an extension of him, a symbol of his audacity. Her first major test came a month after the wedding at the museum's annual gala, the pinnacle of the Boston social calendar. It was the first time she would be in the same room as Arthur and Sophia. Julian's team prepared her for it like a general planning a campaign. A tailor was flown in from Paris. The dress was a masterpiece of deep emerald silk that hugged her curves and draped artistically over her now noticeable pregnant belly. A security team briefed her on floor plans and exit strategies. "Don't engage," Julian told her in the car on the way, his voice low and firm. He wore a classic black tuxedo that made him look even more formidable. "Be serene, untouchable. Your happiness is your weapon. Your indifference is your shield." When they entered the grand ballroom, a hush fell over the crowd. Every head turned. Eleanor felt 100 pairs of eyes on her, but she kept her gaze straight ahead, her hand resting lightly on Julian's arm. He led them to his table, a prime spot near the stage, with the unhurried grace of a king entering his court. She saw them across the room. Arthur looked pale, his smile tense and forced. Sophia, wrapped in an ostentatious display of red sequins and diamonds, was watching Eleanor with barely disguised venom. The sight of Eleanor, radiant and pregnant on Julian's arm, was clearly the ultimate insult. For hours, Eleanor played her part to perfection. She smiled, held polite conversations, and exuded an aura of quiet satisfaction. Julian was a constant, solid presence at her side. He would place a hand on the small of her back when someone approached, or lean in to whisper a witty, dry observation in her ear, creating an illusion of intimacy that was surprisingly convincing. The inevitable confrontation happened near the powder room. Eleanor had excused herself when Sophia cornered her by the ornate mirrors. "Well, well," Sophia sneered, her voice dripping with malice. "The little charity case all fixed up. You know, that emerald color is lovely, but it makes you look common." Eleanor met her own reflection in the mirror, refusing to look directly at Sophia. "It's a shame your dress didn't come with a personality to match, Sophia. Red is the color of passion, and all I see is desperation." Sophia's face tightened. "You think you've won, don't you? Marrying that soulless monster. You're just a pawn in his game with Arthur, a piece of property he acquired to spite his rival." "And what does that make you?" Eleanor replied finally, turning to look at her, her voice cool and even. "The consolation prize? The woman a man married for his father's company? At least my monster is honest about the terms of our contract. Can you say the same about your husband?" Before Sophia could retort, Arthur appeared, rushing to her side. "Sophia, what's happening?" He looked at Eleanor, and his face was a complicated mess of anger, guilt, and something that looked painfully like yearning. "Eleanor," he said, his voice softer than he intended. "You look well," she said, her tone cold and dismissive. It was the indifference that Julian had prescribed, and it was devastatingly effective. She saw him flinch. "Don't talk to her, Arthur," Sophia shrieked, her carefully constructed facade cracking. "Can't you see what she's doing? Flaunting that thing in our faces?" She gestured sharply to Eleanor's stomach. A cold fire ignited in Eleanor's chest. Before she could speak, a low, dangerous voice cut the air. "I would choose your next words very carefully if I were you, Ms. Vidal." Julian was standing at the entrance to the lounge, his eyes like chips of ice. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 20 degrees. He walked slowly toward them, each step measured and threatening. He didn't look at Arthur or Sophia. His gaze was fixed on Eleanor. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice softening almost imperceptibly as he addressed her. She simply nodded, her throat tight. Julian's gaze shifted to Sophia, and the coldness in his eyes was terrifying. "My wife is not to be spoken to in that manner, ever. And as for the thing you so crudely referred to," he said, his hand moving to rest softly and possessively on Eleanor's stomach. "You are speaking of my heir. The next time you address my family, you will do so with the respect they are owed. Is that clear?" Sophia was speechless, her face white with shock and fury. Arthur, the supposed industry titan, looked like a schoolboy being reprimanded by the principal. He stammered, "Julian, this is a private matter. You made it my matter when you put my wife in this position." Julian interrupted, his voice lethally calm. "Leave, now." They scurried away, a humiliated retreat that a dozen onlookers would gossip about for months. The power play was complete. Julian turned back to Eleanor, his expression softening again. "Let's go home." In the car, the silence was different. It wasn't the formal, uncomfortable quiet of their first few weeks. It was thick with unspoken emotion. "Thank you," she said in a low voice. "Protecting you is part of our agreement," he replied, but his voice lacked its usual businesslike tone. "He has no right to cause you distress." Weeks later, the reality of her pregnancy hit her hard. A sudden sharp pain one afternoon sent a wave of panic through her. She clutched her stomach, dizzy and terrified. Ignoring the protocol of contacting Mr. Harrison, she did the only thing she could think of. She called Julian's personal number. He answered on the first ring. "Julian, something's wrong," she gasped. "The baby, I have this pain." The line went silent for a fraction of a second. "Stay where you are." "I'm on my way." She had expected him to send Dr. Finch or Mr. Harrison, but 20 minutes later, it was Julian himself who burst into her wing, his tie loosened, his face pale with a raw, disguised fear she had never seen on him. He didn't hesitate. He lifted her into his arms as if she weighed nothing and carried her to his car, yelling orders at his staff. "Get Finch to the hospital! Clear a path now!" At the hospital, he never left her side. He held her hand while doctors ran tests, his grip firm and reassuring. He spoke to the medical staff with a sharp, urgent authority that got immediate results. The hours blended into a haze of fear and discomfort. It turned out to be a scare, a common pregnancy complication called round ligament pain, but terrifying nonetheless. The baby was fine, healthy and strong. When the doctor left, leaving them alone in the quiet private room, Eleanor finally let go of the breath she had been holding. She began to cry, silent tears of relief and exhaustion rolling down her cheeks. Julian sat on the edge of her bed. He didn't say anything. He simply pulled a handkerchief from his pocket and gently wiped the tears from her face. His touch was hesitant, almost tentative, as if he were touching something impossibly fragile. "It's okay, Eleanor," he murmured, his voice hoarse with emotion. "The baby is fine." She looked at him, this cold, calculating man who had just torn up his day and shown more raw panic and concern than Arthur ever had. He wasn't looking at her as an asset or a pawn. He was looking at her and her belly with a protective fierceness that felt painfully real. "You were scared," she whispered. He looked away, staring out the window, composing himself. The mask of the ruthless businessman returned to its place, but not before she had seen the man behind it. "The Cole heir is a significant investment," his voice said, regaining its usual cold detachment. "I was protecting my investment. But she knew it was a lie. She had seen it in his eyes. In that moment of terror, the lines of their contract had blurred. He wasn't just her protector by contract. In some strange and unexpected way, he was becoming her partner. And the child she was carrying was no longer just hers or a ghost of Arthur's. He was becoming theirs. A new legacy. The hospital scare was a catalyst, shattering the formal distance between them. The invisible walls that separated the east and west wings of the penthouse crumbled. Julian began joining Eleanor for dinner every night, the cavernous dining room feeling less like a boardroom and more like a shared space. Their conversations deepened, moving from polite questions to something more substantial. One afternoon, with the city lights twinkling below, Eleanor found the courage to break through his formidable defenses. "Why the Bennets?" she asked him. His response was a torrent of pain, of how Arthur's grandfather had swindled his father, a visionary architect, out of his invention. It was a story of betrayal that had ignited his ambition and his war against the Bennets. She, in turn, opened up, telling him about her own dreams of compassionate architecture, of building spaces that nurtured communities. He listened with an intensity that made her feel truly seen. The next day, a full suite of state-of-the-art architectural software and design tools was installed in her studio. The attached note was simple: "A mind like yours shouldn't be idle." Empowered, Eleanor began to work, channeling her energy into designing a flagship project for the new Cole Foundation, a series of youth centers in the inner city, built on principles of sustainability, a silent tribute to Julian's father and to the community. When she presented the plan to Julian, not as his wife, but as a professional colleague, he reviewed it with a sharp, critical eye. "This is exceptional, Eleanor," he said, his voice filled with genuine admiration. "It's not just a building. It's a statement. The foundation will fund it. You will lead the project." A sense of purpose entirely her own blossomed inside her. She was earning not just his protection, but his respect. Their partnership was evolving, becoming an alliance of minds as well as of circumstances. A new, softer intimacy grew between them. One night, he found her in the newly finished baby's room and, hesitantly, placed a hand on her stomach. As the baby kicked against his palm, his eyes widened, and a rare, unreserved smile broke through his stern facade. In that moment, he wasn't a corporate predator, but simply a man in awe of the life he had sworn to protect. When she went into labor, Julian was her anchor. He was by her side through every contraction, her strength, her support, her calm, her focus. Arthur Bennett was a ghost from a past life. The man who mattered was here, completely present. Leo Cole was born at dawn with a healthy cry and a shock of dark hair. After the nurses placed the swaddled baby in Eleanor's arms, she looked at Julian. He was standing by the window, looking completely overwhelmed. "Would you like to hold your son?" she asked softly. He came to the bedside with a reverence she had never seen on him. As she gently passed the small bundle into his arms, Julian cradled him against his chest. He looked at the baby who was supposed to be a tool for revenge, and his unshakable composure shattered. A single tear traced a path down his cheek. He had started this journey seeking vengeance, but in the process, he had found a family, the triumph of quiet purpose, and a legacy of love. A few days later, they were home. An urgent call from security informed them that Arthur Bennett was in the lobby, demanding to see the baby. Julian's jaw tightened. He looked at Eleanor, leaving the decision in her hands. "No," she said, her voice clear and firm as she held Leo close. The rage she once felt for Arthur had been replaced by a protective peace, hard as a diamond. Tell him he lost that right a long time ago. Tell him to leave, or my husband will have him removed for trespassing." My husband. The words felt true. They felt final. She realized then that her revenge was complete. It wasn't in Arthur's downward spiral, which she heard rumors about, but in her own quiet happiness. It was in watching Julian, the most ruthless man in the city, softly rock his son to sleep. Their marriage, born from a cold contract, had been rewritten by shared vulnerability and unexpected love, becoming more real than either of them could have anticipated. The birth of Leo Cole transformed their alliance. For Julian, vengeance gave way to legacy. For Eleanor, the instinct to protect her son forged a new, unbreakable strength. The war with the Bennets was no longer about the past. It was about securing a future safe from their toxic influence. Eleanor's purpose sharpened. While organizing her old digital files, she found an encrypted hard drive that Arthur had once dismissively told her to keep, calling it old family business. Her curiosity led her to give it to Julian. His technical team cracked it in a matter of hours, revealing a digital Pandora's box, a confession in gigabytes, decades of Bennett family corruption, from illegal payoffs to fraudulent reports. Most incriminating of all, it contained the original, unaltered partnership documents proving the systematic theft of Julian's father's life's work. In his arrogance, he kept a playbook of his family's sins, Julian said, his voice a low growl as he looked at the screen. Now it's his epitaph. Their retaliation wasn't a leak to the press, but a surgical strike. Julian's legal team quietly delivered the evidence to federal investigators. When the first whispers of a formal investigation began, Julian launched a hostile takeover bid for the now vulnerable Bennett and Associates. Arthur's allies, including the Vidal family, abandoned the sinking ship. The news broke like a tsunami. Bennett and Associates under investigation. The infallible dynasty is finished. The final confrontation wasn't in a boardroom, but in their home. Arthur appeared at the penthouse one night, having slipped past security, a desperate ghost haunting a life he had thrown away. He looked haggard, his arrogance replaced by a raw panic. "Eleanor, you have to stop him," he pleaded, his eyes wild. "My mother, the company, everything is gone. It's your fault." Eleanor stood before him, calm and resolute, holding Leo, who was sleeping peacefully against her shoulder. "No, Arthur, this is your fault. Your family built a kingdom on lies. The foundation was always rotten. All we did was expose the truth." Her gaze fell on Leo, a painful yearning in his eyes. "He's my son. Please, Eleanor, I was a fool. I see it now. We can be a family. You, me, and our son." The words that once would have shattered her were now meaningless. "A family?" she asked, her voice quiet but firm. "You didn't want a family. You wanted to manage a complication. When I became an inconvenience, you tried to throw me away." She looked at her son, then back at the broken man in front of her. "The difference, Arthur, is that the man I am with now saw me at my most broken, and he didn't see an inconvenience. He saw a queen. Now, goodbye." With that devastating final dismissal, she turned her back on him. It was the last time she ever saw him. The Bennett empire was dismantled. Beatrice was indicted, and Arthur, disgraced and disinherited, disappeared. Julian acquired the Bennett Tower and, in a final symbolic move, scheduled it for demolition. In its place, the Alexander Cole Innovation Center would rise, with Eleanor as the lead architect. Months later, Eleanor was standing on her balcony, the city lights twinkling below. Julian came to stand behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. They stood in the comfortable silence of a shared life, their son sleeping peacefully inside. "Our marriage of convenience," she said, turning in his arms to look at him. "Yes," he prompted, his dark eyes soft with an emotion he no longer hid. "It's become very inconvenient," she whispered, a smile touching her lips. "It seems I've fallen in love with my husband." A genuine smile, the one she had grown to cherish, spread across his face. "Then the inconvenience is mutual, Signora," Julian murmured, before he lowered his head and kissed her. It was not a kiss of possession or revenge, but one of deep love and a shared future. A new legacy was being built, not on the ashes of the past, but on the solid ground of a family forged in the fire. From the depths of a devastating betrayal, Eleanor Vance not only survived, but orchestrated a resurrection. She transformed her greatest pain into her greatest power, proving that the best revenge is not loud and explosive, but quiet, strategic, and profoundly satisfying. She didn't just marry her ex-fiancé's enemy. She built a new life, a new legacy, and found a love more real and powerful than the fairy tale she thought she had lost. Her story is a testament to the incredible resilience of the human heart, and a reminder that sometimes losing everything is the only way to find what truly matters. If Eleanor's journey from a broken heart to triumph moved you, and if you believe in the power of rewriting your own story, then please show your support. Hit the like button, share this video with someone who needs a story of strength, and be sure to subscribe to our channel for more unforgettable stories of justice, empowerment, and final victory.